My name is Jodie Mack, and I'm an experimental animator and animation teacher. My animations are existing within this framework of experimental animation. That could mean many different things. When you go back to the historical lineage of it, in some ways it's considered to start out in abstract animation, so animation that isn't necessarily concerned with storytelling. It's more rooted in explorations of movement and time. My work ends up in a few different realms of exhibition possibilities. So a lot of my work circles through what's known as a film festival circuit. So the films play in local, regional, national, and international film festivals that all work on different scales, from sort of the smallest DIY full of heart film festivals to the largest international multi-day affairs. One of the original reasons I was drawn to experimental filmmaking is because a lot of times the artists get to travel with their films and get to talk about their films with the audience while the work is shown. My work also screens and shows, not necessarily in cinematic sort of projected formats, but also in sort of sculptural capacities in museums and galleries. I'm a pretty firm believer in having as much stuff available on the internet as possible. Even though it's not necessarily an ideal cinematic viewing experience, I think that what is gained through access is comparable in some ways to the idea of being able to experience it in a cinema. So over the years, I've found several capacities in which to sort of share this with different sorts of public groups. Some of my films have narrative concerns, and some of my films have documentary concerns. A lot of my films deal with different types of collections. So for example, I've worked with a lot of different collections of fabrics. And if I start a film with a collection of fabrics, I might assess the fabrics and think, well, what sort of motion relationships do I have on this table? Over the course of my filmmaking path, I've really worked with many different materials, but a lot of the different materials that I've worked with in the past center around this idea that I have about kind of like cultural detritus and capital detritus. So objects that sort of seep down almost to the point of needing to go to the trash. And wrapping paper, for example, because I think a lot about wrapping paper and how it's kind of a product that's made to be thrown away. So right now I'm venturing into new territory and starting to work a lot with natural materials. So for example, I just finished a film with minerals, and I also just finished a film with plants. When I was young, in middle school, I did a lot of community theater. So, you know, from a very young age, I was interested in the idea of performance and sort of putting on a show and stagecraft and set design and directing and all the things that come along with the craft of theater. One of my favorite filmmakers' names is Robert Breer. And one of the first films that I saw by him was called Eyewash. And it was very impactful on me because every frame in the film is of a different object. This idea of sequencing completely different objects on the film strip blew my mind in some way, and I realized that all definitions I had previously had of animation were completely normative in some ways, and that there were so many more possibilities for the medium of animation. It's become more of a goal of mine to make experimental filmmaking as accessible as possible. And so that means making decisions about where to screen the films. You know, if the general public isn't attending MoMA or big museums, or most of our American population doesn't really even live in places that have access to this, what is our job as artists to provide this sort of access and accessibility to art moving forward? So I feel equally comfortable in a sort of high art setting as I do in a kindergarten classroom or something like that, because I want to find a way to be able to find and illuminate points of entry into this type of work for everybody.